There's a kind of silence that doesn't scream emptiness, but truth. A silence that doesn't come from absence, but presence. Your own. And most people never get close to it, because they've been taught that being alone is failure. That without someone beside you, you are incomplete. That solitude is something to be fixed, not felt. But what if they were wrong? What if the most sacred version of yourself only emerges when you're not being watched? What if healing doesn't arrive through love, but through isolation? Jung understood this. He knew the soul doesn't grow under applause. It grows in the quiet, where there's no one left to impress, no mask left to wear, and no script left to follow. We were raised to believe connection is everything, but somewhere along the way, we replaced connection with dependency. And now, silence terrifies us. Because in silence, we meet the parts we've buried. We hear the voices we've silenced. We remember what it's like to be without a mirror. Alone, the ego begins to panic. It needs attention to feel real. It needs reaction to feel alive. But the soul doesn't flinch. It waits, patiently. Because it knows that solitude isn't punishment. It's initiation. You're not weak for feeling lonely. You're awakening. And awakening always begins with discomfort. The kind that forces you to sit with your wounds instead of distracting yourself from them. And that's where transformation begins. So if you're alone right now, and it aches, stay. Not because it's easy, but because it's real. Because on the other side of this, silence is a version of you that's never depended on noise to feel whole. And if you're still here, still listening, maybe you're ready, not to escape the solitude, but to embody it. There comes a moment in solitude when the silence stops feeling empty and starts feeling honest, not comforting, not easy, just true. It's the kind of truth that doesn't ask for validation. It just exists. Raw, quiet, and unsettling. In that space, something ancient stirs. A part of you that was never shaped by opinions, that never needed approval to feel alive. Maybe you've never met that part before. Maybe you've spent a lifetime performing versions of yourself to earn safety, to be seen, to be loved. But now there's no one to perform for, no one watching, just you. And that's terrifying, because it strips you bare. Without the roles, the routines, the constant noise, who are you? That question doesn't come with answers. It comes with silence, and that silence is your beginning. Jung called this the return to the self, the journey inward that begins when the ego finally stops clinging to its mask. And not because it's been defeated, but because it's exhausted. Exhausted from pretending. Exhausted from chasing connection that always feels conditional. Exhausted from building identity on how others see you. So you stop. Not in weakness, but in bravery. You stop running. And for the first time, you feel everything you've been avoiding, not to drown in it, but to listen. And what you hear isn't a scream, it's a whisper, a memory you forgot, a need you buried, a truth you abandoned to belong. The stillness isn't punishment, it's presence, the kind of presence that doesn't need to prove anything. It just is. And in that isness, you begin to dissolve, not disappear, but unfold. Because the person you've been is not a lie, but a layer. And solitude begins to peel that layer away, slowly, painfully, gently, until what's left isn't your persona. It's your presence, not what the world told you to be, but what you are, when no one's looking. And that's not loss, that's liberation. When all distractions fade and the stage collapses, what remains is not clarity, but confrontation. The confrontation with what you've buried, with what you've edited to survive. This isn't just solitude anymore. It's exposure to your truth, to your fears, to the self that never got to speak. And that voice, it doesn't come out gentle. It trembles, it roars, it weeps. Jung called this moment the loosening of the persona, not as destruction, but as surrender. You're not losing your identity. You're watching the mask grow tired, because for so long you've carried roles like armor. And now, finally, your soul is asking to breathe. You might feel lost, disoriented, hollow, but that isn't emptiness, it's space. And space is what your true self has always needed to exist. Not the curated version, not the acceptable one, but the raw, unpolished, flawed version. The one you abandoned to be loved. As the old mask fades, so do the defenses, and what rises is grief, anger, shame. But these aren't enemies, they're echoes of the parts you silenced to survive. They're not breaking you, they're releasing you. The shadow starts to speak, not as a monster, but as memory. The child who wasn't protected, the teen who was silenced, the adult who keeps pretending. And as the silence deepens, the mirror turns inward. You begin to see yourself, not as a concept, but as a collection of wounds, forgotten dreams, and unspoken truths. Most people run from this mirror, back to noise, back to false connection, back to safety. But you're here. And that changes everything, because facing the shadow is not glamorous. There's no applause, no milestones, just a slow peeling away of illusions, until what's left is just you. Vulnerable, unfinished, but finally real. This pain is not a sign of weakness. It's proof that you're waking up, that you're stepping outside the false skin you wore for decades, that you're finally allowing the truth to surface, even if it burns. And that's how it begins, not with inspiration, but with discomfort so deep it rattles the foundation of who you thought you were. And still, you stay. This isn't collapse. It's metamorphosis, the part of the journey that feels like breaking, but is actually the first stretch of new wings pressing against the cocoon. You're not lost. You're being rewritten. And every trembling step into this unknown is a refusal to return to the illusion you once called home. Here is where most turn around, where silence feels too loud and pain too personal. But if you stay, if you dare to stay, you cross a threshold, one that doesn't offer applause, only depth. Jung understood, it is in this abyss, not above it, that the seeds of wholeness begin to bloom. But let's not romanticize it. Some of us didn't choose to be alone. We were left, pushed into the silence by betrayal, by absence, by life's brutal timing. And solitude, when not chosen, doesn't feel like space. It feels like exile. You tell yourself you're strong, that you don't need anyone. But beneath that voice is another quieter one, whispering, they didn't stay. And that hurts. That shapes you. You build independence, but it's carved from abandonment. You wear resilience like armor, but inside, your heart beats with guarded rhythm, never fully trusting peace. There's a difference between being alone with yourself and being stranded within your own walls. One heals, the other hollows. Jung warned of this. When the soul seals itself off for too long, it begins to wither. And what you call self-sufficiency may be self-preservation in disguise. So be honest, is your solitude freedom or is it fear? Did you choose this silence or did it choose you? Because there's no healing in hiding, only delay, only repetition. Unfelt pain becomes pattern. And every time you say, I don't need anyone, what you might mean is, I never got to be needed safely. You are not damaged for having learned to survive. But now survival is no longer enough. You don't need walls, you need space. You don't need distance, you need presence. Not from others, but from yourself. The self you abandoned to avoid the ache. When you begin to choose solitude again, not to punish, not to protect, but to reconnect, that's when your nervous system exhales. That's when your body, which has been flinching through life, starts to soften. And that's when something fragile but sacred emerges. A sense of safety, not from the world, but from within. Your shoulders begin to loosen. The weight that once felt permanent now softens. Not because life got lighter, but because something within you finally stopped resisting. This isn't numbness, it's nervous system relief. A quiet signal from the body whispering, you don't have to brace anymore. For the first time, safety is not something you're demanding from the outside world. It's something you're creating within. Jung said the unconscious is not just buried in thoughts. It lives in the body. It hides in the tight jaw, in the shallow breath, in the restless sleep. Every repressed emotion became a knot in your back. Every unspoken truth, a pressure in your chest. Healing then isn't about thinking better. It's about feeling safely. It's about finally inhabiting the body that had to go to war for you when you couldn't fight back. And slowly, the war ends. You sleep without bargaining with tomorrow. You speak without rehearsing survival. You breathe without permission. The body, once an alarm system, becomes home again. And solitude no longer echoes like punishment. It holds you like a sanctuary. This shift isn't dramatic. There are no fireworks, only presence. A return to the ordinary moments where peace was hiding all along. And that peace doesn't need you to explain yourself. It doesn't ask for credentials. It simply arises, uninvited, but long awaited. Here, in this quiet restoration, you learn a sacred truth. You were never meant to live in defense mode. Your strength was never supposed to be constant vigilance. It was meant to be trust, not in others, but in the self you've slowly come back to. As your defenses drop, something deeper stirs beneath the surface. Intuition. Not the kind that shouts or demands. The kind that waits, that watches, that speaks only when there's enough stillness to be heard. It doesn't arrive with certainty. It arrives with clarity. A subtle knowing that asks nothing from you except one thing, presence. And when you stop outsourcing your truth, you realize you've always known, not in your mind, but in your gut, in your bones, in the silent compass that survived even when you forgot yourself. That's the beginning of inner wisdom, the kind no one can teach you, because it was never outside you to begin with. Your intuition never vanished. It simply waited for the noise to lower, for your breath to return, for your presence to deepen. Jung didn't see intuition as some mystical sixth sense. He saw it as a primary function of the psyche, a perception not of what is seen, but of what wants to be seen. A truth not found in logic, but in listening. And that listening only becomes possible when you've made enough inner room for silence to speak. It begins quietly. A flicker of knowing, a shift in your stomach when something's off. A soft pull when something aligns. You won't have evidence, you won't always have words, but your body will know. Your energy will move differently. And the more you allow that inner signal to lead, the less you'll crave external validation. You won't need signs from others to trust what you've already sensed. This isn't fantasy, it's alignment. The moment your inner and outer selves begin to face the same direction. You no longer need to analyze every choice into exhaustion. You begin to feel your way forward, not impulsively, but with a grounded sense of clarity. You're not predicting the future. You're preparing for it by becoming the kind of person who can hold it. And then something even deeper begins to stir, the image of your future self, not as a goal, but as a quiet presence, a guide within. You begin to feel their calm, their discernment, their boundaries, not as rules, but as natural extensions of who they've become. In Jungian terms, this is the emergence of the self, the totality of who you are beneath all fragmentation. It doesn't demand that you be perfect. It simply asks that you listen, because when you do, everything starts shifting. Decisions get simpler, desires get clearer, and people who once triggered confusion lose their pull. And here's the irony. What you once chased outside is now something you embody. The love, the clarity, the path, it never abandoned you. You just needed enough stillness to hear where it was coming from. So now, instead of chasing your future self, you begin to live as them. One breath, one choice, one silent knowing at a time. Something shifts when you stop seeking alignment and start radiating it. You begin to notice it in the smallest moments, how your breath slows before decisions, how your body no longer tenses at old triggers, how you feel at home in situations that once left you scrambling. That's not coincidence. That's resonance. The outer world hasn't changed, not yet, but you have, and that changes how the world relates to you. You feel peace before you achieve anything, freedom before the doors open, because now, nothing outside of you is holding your center in place. You've built it from within, and that kind of stability cannot be shaken by delay, rejection, or misunderstanding. You're no longer acting to get somewhere. You're acting from somewhere, a place of truth, a place of wholeness. The presence that emerges from that is quiet, but undeniable. You don't need to announce it. It moves ahead of you like a silent current. It doesn't ask for attention. It transforms by existing. Jung called the self the nucleus of psychic totality. When you live from there, your decisions simplify, your attachments soften, your anxiety fades. You no longer try to control outcomes. You embody direction. People who once drained you begin to fall away, not because you resisted them, but because you no longer vibrate where they live. Situations that once triggered survival mode now find you rooted, not because you're cold, but because you're clear. You don't perform for approval anymore. You no longer trade authenticity for belonging. You walk with yourself now, and that's enough. This isn't about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming unchangeable at your core. You're still soft, still open, but no longer shape-shifting to earn space. You don't shrink to soothe discomfort. You don't inflate to impress. You just are. And that presence, centered, grounded, whole, reshapes your entire field of experience. What you used to chase now arrives naturally, not because you mastered strategy, but because you anchored your truth. Your energy becomes your message, your clarity becomes your protection, and your boundaries become sacred, not because they're rigid, but because they're rooted in respect. You're no longer waiting for the world to give you permission to be whole. You've already chosen to live as if you are, and the world has no choice but to adjust. There is a unique kind of power that arises when solitude is no longer an escape, but a choice. It doesn't just reshape your inner world, it alters the very field around you. When you're no longer seeking completion through others, your energy shifts. You stop chasing places to belong because you already feel rooted in yourself. And suddenly, that quiet self-respect begins to echo outward. Your presence stops asking for approval. It radiates integrity. And from that grounded state, love begins to transform, not into something you cling to, but something you share without fear. You no longer view intimacy as surrendering your center. You meet others from a place of fullness, because now you're not loving to be saved. You're loving because your soul has space to give. Conscious solitude reveals that the most sacred form of love doesn't bloom through dependency. As Jung taught, no genuine connection can exist if both people are still orbiting around emptiness. If one hasn't met their own soul, how can they truly meet someone else's? When wholeness becomes your home, love loses its sharp edges. It's no longer a rescue, it's a resonance. You begin to see your old patterns with clarity, how often you shrank yourself to be accepted, stayed silent to avoid abandonment, molded your needs around the fear of being alone. But now those compromises feel foreign, because the person you've become can no longer breathe inside relationships that demand self-erasure. This isn't about building walls. It's about guarding what is sacred within you. In this state, you no longer beg to be seen. You simply are. And because of that, you only remain where your essence is met with reverence, not resistance. Love no longer demands that you disappear to be chosen. It asks that you arrive fully and remain intact. And when it finds someone who has done the same inner work, something rare emerges, not fusion, but union. A bond where both can walk side by side, unarmored, unafraid, and uncompromised. This is the gift of conscious solitude, a love that flows not from lack, but from wholeness, not from a need to be filled, but from the desire to share. The kind of love that doesn't collapse under the weight of expectation, but expands in the presence of truth. So the question now is not how to find someone, but how to stay connected to this self you've rediscovered, how to live in the world without losing that sacred stillness within you. The answer begins with presence, not just mindfulness, but a living relationship with your own essence. Carl Jung called it active imagination, a way of entering inner space with openness and attention. In the final part of this journey, we'll go deeper into this practice. You'll learn how to stay rooted even when life pulls at you. And if you've made it this far, consider subscribing to Beyond the Shadow, a space where these conversations continue, where we don't run from the dark, but learn how to grow through it. Let's step into the last part together. Active imagination is not wishful thinking. It's a sacred dialogue between your conscious awareness and the deeper currents of your unconscious. A symbolic bridge that reconnects you to the parts of yourself that words alone can't reach. And through that bridge, something ancient inside you begins to stir. A knowing, a presence, a direction. This practice isn't about escaping the world. It's about grounding in the self. What Jung called the self, with a capital S, the core of your psychological wholeness. To touch it, you don't need perfection. You need presence. So find a quiet space, not just empty, but intentional. Sit. Close your eyes. Let the noise drop away, layer by layer. Then breathe into yourself, not to fix or force, but to simply arrive. And when you're ready, say silently, "I am here." These words aren't just markers, they're a doorway. And through that doorway, begin to visualize a version of you who already lives from inner truth. Maybe it's not a face, maybe it's a feeling, a stillness, a posture, a rhythm. Let it speak. What does it let go of? What burdens are no longer carried? What kind of life does it choose now, not from fear, but from clarity? Ask, what did you surrender to become this whole? What do I still resist? And then, just listen. Don't analyze. Let the answer come in images, emotions, echoes. Even silence has a voice if you stay long enough to hear it. When the experience feels complete, end with one final sentence. I see you, and I walk toward you. Not as an idea, but as a lived intention, because this isn't visualization, it's initiation. Each time you return to this practice, you're building a stronger connection with the version of yourself that already knows the way forward. You're not becoming someone else. You're remembering who you've always been, beneath the noise, beneath the roles, beneath the fear. Conscious solitude didn't isolate you. It reintroduced you to your own essence, to the voice within that was buried under the hunger to be needed, accepted, or saved. Now you're full, not because someone filled you, but because you stopped leaking your power in places that couldn't hold you. You no longer need to be chosen to feel worthy. You've already chosen yourself. And that is the final return, not to a perfect life, but to a true one. Not to a future self, but to the self that has always waited within. If this journey stirred something in you, if even one line echoed a truth you forgot, then stay with us. Subscribe to Beyond the Shadow, where we explore these silent revolutions of the soul, where darkness becomes not the enemy, but the entrance, and where you're never truly alone, only on your way home.